My name is Emily Hartwright, and I'm a 34-year-old small business owner living in Windmere Valley, a quiet little town nestled deep in the mountains where everyone seems to know everyone else's business, but no one ever seems to know where they left their keys. I grew up in this town, went to its schools, walked its dusty roads on summer nights, and endured the kind of judgmental stares you get when you graduate high school and still can't afford to leave. I always dreamed of getting out, of making a name for myself somewhere far from the narrow-minded gossip that followed people like a shadow, but life had other plans. After college, I decided to start my own floral design business here, thinking the slower pace and loyal local customers might help me build something. In a way, I was right. But I never could have predicted what would happen or how one old wound would finally lead to something like justice. Everything started with a woman named Margaret Callahan, my nemesis, though I didn't really see her that way at first. She was 12 years older than me, married early, had 2 kids already in elementary school when I was just entering high school, and was kind of the local queen bee of small-town church cliques and charity bake sales. Her dad had been rich once, back when sugar cane farming was booming in this part of the valley. Now he was gone, but Margaret was still convincing people she was someone the town should take seriously, even though she hadn't done anything productive since her diaries were voted most popular in high school. She taught English in our high school when I was a junior and senior, a loud, predatory Neanderthal dressed up in designer glasses and kitten sweaters, who seemed to thrive on reminding kids that she'd seen better days and better futures for herself, and they'd better not think they could compete with her. She singled me out. The why, I suppose, came down to me being quieter than others, easier to take a verbal jab at maybe. Or maybe deep down she saw something in me that she feared, that I wasn't chasing after boys like most girls my age or slipping blueprints under her desk hoping she wouldn't notice my 2 hours of sleep, and I was building something like focus, a direction. Whatever the reason, Margaret never let a class go by without reminding me I didn't belong in school at all. I was fluffy and dreamy, which she used as code for stupid. She called me late bloomers pretending to be hothouse flowers or worse, told me to find other hills to spill into. Once I got suspended because I mouthed off after she mocked me for thinking, incorrectly, that Milton's Paradise Lost was a play when it was actually an epic poem. I kept trying to defend myself by saying, hey, I was just trying to keep up with my first digitized internship as a florist and doing homework after midnight, okay. But no, she insisted I was again wasting the class's time by trying too hard. That suspension was a joke, total overreaction. But back then there was no social media, no way to expose that kind of unfairness. You just dealt with it, bore it, took the hit, and hoped to find your own redemption somewhere else. Well, flash forward 12 years. My business is growing, colorfully so, 5 large corporate clients in the valley and an event planner's roster full of weddings, funerals, museums, community theater displays. The hustle had paid off. But I was still emotionally tied to that time. Windmere Valley was full of ghosts, and hers was the tallest, thorniest, one that kept swelling closer every time I drove past the school building or heard someone muttering, "She's nice but not the sharpest tool at the garden store." Then came the event that would change everything. My best friend Susie called one April evening after I'd finished shipping out arrangements for the local farmers market grand opening. She told me that Margaret and her sister were putting on a home decor festival in town to fundraise for the struggling arts department at the high school, where students now run Beatles poster projects and giant glitter lantern sculpture units. Literally everything but real learning. Classic Margaret move. A whole 3 days of tablecloths and hanging baskets, Susie said. And guess who's helping run it? I can imagine, I said. Yup. Our beloved Miss Callahan, now fresh out of teaching and volunteering her way to heaven. There was a beat of silence before she added, she might be taking over the curriculum committee next fall if she can pull off a successful fundraiser. That nailed it. Margaret was still trying to climb. But now she was back in school, back in my world, and whispering into little girls' ears that they should act safe, not ambitious, say the right things instead of the true things. 34 years old, and I felt like I was 13 again, handed back a paper with sarcastic red marks and scribbled comments calling me naive and overreaching. It was like a personal alarm bell. I'd worked too hard to let someone from the past start sitting in judgment of me again. I had every right to own the little floral empire I had built in the foothills of the valley, but hearing her name pop up in that same old building made me want so much more, made me want to make her feel powerless the way she had made me feel. Not petty revenge like stomping on a cupcake or batting down some posters, something poetic and precise. Something that would put her in a slow burn chokehold, unable to escape who she had made me feel like. Something public. Something creative. Something lasting, but how I needed intel. So I did what any self-respecting person with a strong web browser and barely any filter would do. I snooped. The next day I visited the event website she had set up. She was organizing an artisan craft day, award ceremony, and silent auction open to the public, and guess what? It had real pictures of her and matching quotes like, "Inspired by the youth, I believe this festival will blossom tomorrow's artists." Gag. But what caught my eye way more was the list of contributors. There, not too far from the top of the donors we love, page was my name. Emily Hartwright, floral artist, certified by Windmere's Chamber of Commerce, donator of a dozen custom hanging funets that would match the spring theme of tranquil earth. Wait, my craft items were going to the festival. My business permit allowed me to support small town events like that, and I had sent a reply to the request email months ago allowing them to use them for marketing purposes. And I never said Margaret could personally take credit. So now the situation sat like an old photo, politely framed by the person who ruined the picture, inaccurate and sweltering with ego. My plants, in fact, weaving centerpieces on tables and photos captioned, "Margaret Callahan designs the greenhouse feel of our gathering." She was claiming my work as her own. She hadn't even reached out to me personally after the high school years. I could have been dead and buried and she'd still Photoshop me into being her assistant. But this was not just theft, it was performance. She was using me to burnish her do-gooder brand. After calling Susie and raving and pacing for about 30 minutes, I sat still for a moment and started breathing through the noise in my head. This wasn't just something minor. This was a chance. A chance to pull the curtain back and make her face the consequences of stepping on people who thought they were invisible. Of course, at first I considered the subtle route, like finding a way to confront her in front of everyone during the festival, exposing her theft of my designs through passive-aggressive floral name tags or messages slipped into bouquets. I considered it, but deep down I knew it wouldn't be enough. Or if I did that, she'd probably sue me for libel and ruin me financially. What I needed was a trap that looked perfectly legal, something that could not just derail her campaign, but leave her reputation floating IXI in vinegar. So I set aside my patience and designed a map in my mind, every branch of potential plotting toward one target Margaret always seemed to avoid: humiliation. I was going to give her the kind of power failure she'd ignored 100 times in kids like me. I had to understand her life structure first. The festival turned out to be a 2-day affair, and Margaret had volunteered to curate the Tranquil Earth arrangements with the help of a few local students. Perfect. Next step, call the town council office. Margaret's resignation from teaching had never been announced officially to the public. She had taken a leave to work on personal projects and then never came back. I checked article archives, local calendars, and even got in touch with a family who let me see a copy of the school newsletter that dragged her out of acceptable obscurity and back onto center stage just so she could float back up, a volunteer project. With kids, her calling card, I remembered a common quirk of hers: Margaret always recorded things. Her organizing meetings, radio interviews, overloud phone calls, even when she didn't ask anyone's permission. She loved tape as her own kind of insurance. Well then, maybe I could create a little pressure. Maybe I could spiral things around her head until her world caved in like a collapsed greenhouse. Now, revenge is not something most people admit to planning with the precision I used, but let's call it justice. Because remember, I didn't just want her to feel the burn of shame. I wanted everyone in Windmere Valley to know she had earned it, so I showed up to volunteer. Salespeople aren't the only ones who learn charm. Actors do too. Act 2. The climb, the fall, the shattering. I applied to help arrange the flowers on event tables and create a local design competition for high school kids under Ms. Callahan's supervision. I didn't mention my ownership of the arrangements, only that I had experience and knowledge in floral design. If anyone questioned how intimate I was with the Tranquil Earth theme, I smiled and deflected like a polite Sunday school kid walking across a live wire. She greeted me with faux warmth and barely fake surprise when I showed up the week before the festival, asking how I had grown my business. And she didn't even pretend to remember that I had been in her class. Of course she didn't. Margaret trampled over girls' dreams like confetti at her own ego parade. We went at it building displays, coaching students, trying to create project arrangements, and digging through soil until there was real time to bloom as a team. For 3 days, I treated her like she had changed, like she finally understood humility and grace. I wrote flowery thank yous to her as she captured photos for the event's press outreach. I sounded infected with inspiration as we walked to the bank's stage for setup. Don't worry, I was buying time. The festivals were always opened by the mayor, followed by an awards ceremony and a ribbon cutting on Friday morning. Then on Saturday and Sunday it would flood with tourists and home design hobbyists who bought tickets to walk through the stalled school gym turned flower tropicalism. It was here I planned to strike, not against students, never them. Remember the nemesis. It's not personal against the kids. The kids were just as flummoxed by teachers who showed off their past like it's a passport. I had one plan for the final floral arrangement she'd designed, or rather, claimed to have designed. A towering centerpiece in the entryway made from lilies, sunflowers, driftwood frames, and a panel that read Margaret's tranquil earth in puffy lettering. Let's just say that a few days before setup, I withdrew my manpower from the arrangement. Lied about a competitor promise and backed out coolly. Then I offered her some helpful suggestions via email mentioning that my stall could still be moved to the front. That is, if she got the design finished correctly, letting her decide that the sublime centerpiece was still mine, her only defense against looking incompetent. She reeled me back in within the hour. No way she was going to handle that much flower tension before the media, so I sprang into action. Inside the table centerpiece I weaved in my secret, a full wall of paper cones hidden inside the foliage which slowly released phrases when opened in public. Each of the 24 student volunteers I had connected with was involved somehow in the final reveal. None of them knew what was coming, but they trusted me because I didn't boss them around the way Ms. Callahan would. From flashcards under vases reading "Click it" or "Ticket Ms. Callahan," to silk floral ribbons designed as fact blotters embedded in anemones and tulip leaves. There were personal stories from other former students, stories she told me as her regrets, and every instance where she cut kids off for not matching her mold. Each story, a flower, each smear of truth, a petal. I hired a freelance videographer to hide quietly and film the setup with infrared night mounts and a portable rig in friends' tents, just timing the keynote speech and Margaret's ribbon cutting. Writers are quiet people. Vigs can be louder. Friday morning arrived, tens of people began trickling in, crowding near the booths and hugging the school marshals in long woolen scarves. There was a standing applause after the mayor's opening remarks, and Margaret gave me a smug little side glance as if to say, "CHOOSY Chinese letter, ING things go well." She stepped onto the stage and began a prepared speech she hadn't written, a rewriting of her past, rebuilt to make her seem wise and kindly. Educators, when done right, can shift the lives of students like golden soil shaping emerging petals of growth. Typical Margaret. High on metaphor. And then I stepped forward, not in protest, not loud or explosive. I smiled. "Before we begin the ribbon cutting, I'd like to show the crowd our special blooming centerpiece. It has been months in the making." She looked at me, grateful at first, until I reached for the bottom display panel and pulled a little tassel she had helped me install yesterday. The cone began spinning. Out from within the display unfolded not just petals, but pieces of paper decorated by paper holders that unweaved one by one to the crowd. "Click it or ticket." Margaret tailored suspensions without proof, said, "I'd never amount to anything, but I built something meaningful." I survived her classroom with real flowers. Other students, too. Sunlight spilled into the banners of information. Margaret had never expected to bloom again. Gasps followed. Murmurs zoomed across the room. Someone asked, "Is that Emily Hartwright?" Of course, she stood frozen at the podium, eyes wide like broken glass. Her usual easy charisma fled entirely, and I watched her as she scanned the visual carnage. The flower design she had narcissistically labeled as hers was, after all, mine, and now everyone knew. I followed with a 1-minute personal flourish at the mic. "This wasn't just about me, folks. Over 8 years, Ms. Callahan unjustly told dozens of my peers that they were weak, distracted, or uneducable. Low-life material unfit to study among real thinkers. Let's just say I put in extra time to prove her wrong. But this design, it was a collaborative hard time for those young women, the ones she never believed would have flowers of their own." And I stepped away before anyone could ask follow-ups. The camera caught her myopic disbelief as she realized her entire center burst had been sabotaged by a quiet older student she'd once glued an F to just for being tired mid-class. Now with local media printing the finished Pride display centerpiece the next day with blog headlines like, "Hartwright's Tranquil Earth unravels Margarets hope," or "The Blossomed Reckoning." CLHAN's history of ridiculing students supplied impetus for appealing art flag AT event, but Margaret didn't go down quietly. Her smear campaign hit back faster than expected. She accused me of sabotage, of jealousy, even started posting grainy photos from the setup period, suggesting that other volunteers might have been involved. Naturally, she didn't question the perfect recall. My version fit too orderly to be real. But she wasn't about to let a third act humiliate her. Only now the festival appraised the sunlight through the leaves of her flaws. Instead of quietly fading, people came forward. Her former volunteer student groups, now young women in their early 20s, shared their own version of Margaret's class, how she called them lazy, how she never graded growth, how she slid promptly into judgment but avoided allowing hard feelings to matter. As more testimonials hit town forums, her home daycare halo started crumbling. I crushed her by not fighting at all. I simply created witnesses, and this time they had grown teeth. One alum, now a councilwoman, followed town ethics codes and made a retroactive review of her coaching program curriculum, finding deliberate plagiarism from the previous 5 years. Nothing actionable legally, but the exposure ensured the school board would no longer consider her for teaching contracts. I thought the fire had done its job until Monday. I got a call from Susie. She just filed a defamation lawsuit against the festival asking for damages of $20,000. Says you violated trust and property. They're calling it vandalism. 20,000. Sad but predictable. She thought she could slash a lawsuit across my hopes for coverage money because the center panel would be impossible to trace. Especially since I had burned my original notes in the soaked vinegar of doubt and only released them once streaming footage was up. But she had wait too. Worse, she knew people who knew people. It lasted a week. The papers were filed and the legal machine began to churn. It started battering my business. Not lawsuits yet, but photos of Margaret's side of the story started blowing up in the Windmere Chronicle's gossip column. They disingenuously tied the complexity of the Floral Center display to an oversensitive vendetta. And I began getting emails, clients canceling events, vendors unsigned contracts, even friends asked, "Emily, do you think you crossed a line?" Suddenly I was the disturbed landscape in this town's small garden mentality. The accusations turned fast internal, but I held one secret Margaret still didn't know. See, if everything had gone as planned, the cameras would have caught the audience as they said it, click it or ticket. That viral hashtag became undeniable when public pressure demanded the full video footage be re-released from the cameras the town had installed for the ribbon cutting for viewing, archived on the school's Wi-Fi system. And when they finally did, it didn't like her. Inside the footage, you could hear my students mention Margaret's tenure in class, how once she had canceled a girls' science fair prep because her dream was social work, not science. You could hear voices shouted from the crowd, "I was grounded for a typo in 2007 because of this woman." Then came photos on other girls' phones uncovered in investigation. Margaret's personal memorabilia stack titled "Burnouts," found on one of her recyclables bins when a custodial worker mistakenly threw it away, and the local dump sold it online after sorting it. The sick part? Years in the garbage, but they all came back stronger and louder than ever. She hadn't just ruined my confidence. She ruined town girls' backup tracks, 2 lives after school plans. And now we were all producing again. The suit was thrown out of court after settling for a token apology. The Chronicle ran on their webpage. Public mischaracterization of Hartwright's innocuous floral design was misguided. Margaret's ties to the festival were severed instantly. Her fundraising fell through. She closed out the start of May with nothing but a small bruise on her ego and a 13-year gap of wasted goodwill. I should have felt satisfied then, shouldn't I? But in a moment I will never forget, deep in May's misty dawn breeze on the local farmers' co-op trail, I stumbled into Margaret again, trying not to apply sunscreen in front of the same blank-faced lilac wall, where once she made me burn up in shame as a high school senior for falling asleep during a philosophy poem project. She wasn't smiling, but she said my name like a cup of cold coffee she hadn't seen coming. "Emily," she said. I turned slowly, hands full of tissue tags I'd collected for centerpieces I used in healing therapy for the girls who came forward. She said, "You don't owe me an audience, but you do owe yourself an ending that doesn't mirror the one I gave you." I paused. That wasn't vengeance, she admitted. That was correction, framing me only one way, as if she believed empathy still grew on the border of her vision. "You think I'm bitter because of your words," I said. "You think I want to shame you, really? Or maybe you just never saw me as the person who brings roses out of millet fields." She didn't flinch, she didn't run. She asked me quietly if I'd help her really build the next project, one that actually trained girls to bloom their own workshop lines. A mentorship called Bloom Not Burn. I declined. "Too late for gestures," I offered. "Now's the phase when I start building trust between girls who want to pursue what they want, not what some teacher thinks you should clear through filters like dishonest mold or rot." A full week passed. I ended up getting a small apology letter through the festival's admin board, anonymous, sure, but signed with a faint CALLIGRPHY Chinese letter, like she wrote it and then erased her name, hoping I might piece it together anyway. It said simply, "I must grow scripture from soil again. Thank you for showing me I was pruning the wrong petals." Heartbreakingly ironic, sure, enough to give closure, not in the least, and yet 2 months later it mattered. My business excellently stayed afloat. More importantly, girls came to me wanting not just floral work but their own craft. A dozen of the festival volunteers formed the first chapter of something I called the Bloom Syndicate, a cooperative enabling teenage girls to market and sell crafts, floral arrangements, homemade textiles, you name it. Not held under tight-lipped advisors or cruel evaluations, but built on creativity as a safe harbor. And guess which name links Celebrity Choir Circle to contribute to our opening Twitter campaign MS? Callahan, no explanation. Just a very boxy donation that matched the total entry item we sold to the elementary school. She didn't need to say anything about it. I kept the Bloom Syndicate's founding vision free of her, but let one of the girls write a thank you note that went republished across town social media spreads. It read, "To the anonymous flow of change that allowed us to see truth blooming, we're not canceling history. We're redirecting its irrigation pipes." I didn't know if Margaret would ever see that note. I didn't. I had one better than she could destroy. Now Windmere Valley knows the true scent of my growth. And sometimes the smell of dark, damp soil makes a person cry. Act 3. The blooms echo 6 months later. The syndicate was up and running in 3 other Mountain Valley towns. We were even planning a virtual pop-up market around the holidays, giving girls outside of Windmere exposure to mobile art and small business marketing, without depending on old, catty judgment structures. I got my first Bloom Challenge event, 3 girls under the age of 17, forced to design a full centerpiece display using nothing but dandelions, driftwood, and a budget. Challenge-based learning but wrapped in support, not shame. Unexpectedly, the night before the showcase, I got a Facebook message. "You're not entirely right to make me pretty. You built a place I was never allowed to create." Fair's far from Margaret Callahan, no apology. But it was symbolic, I replied. "Hope you respect dandelions." They don't give up, neither do we. "Hope you enjoy the showcase on Stream Festival tomorrow, live at 6 p.m. She replied. Did she come? I'll never know. The event was streamed, not live. But the next morning, a plain brown box arrived at my flower station. Inside, a single note: 3 students win. 10 win tomorrow, printed in my handwriting from 12 years ago. I had never thrown away my high school assignments. But in this note, someone had laminated that Milton essay I once handed in. The one Margaret mercilessly starred me for calling a play when it was, in fact, an epic poem intended to last over time and including chosen redemption. Attached was a check for $3,500 that several syndicate students could officially begin summer apprentice roles at my shop. Signature unseen. I wasn't going to frame that one. I was going to plan it.